I'm usually pretty audible no matter what.
You're being picked up. That mic is cranked up.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. How are things?
Okay.
Woo! What is, this happened last month, right? That we couldn't figure out I couldn't figure out the way to pause properly. You all had it down, I realize.
Today's not good.
There we go. We got it. Today is, you're right. You want to change that real quick? Okay, it's actually May 2nd, in case anyone missed that. Don't let the slide sway you the wrong way.
Happy Cinco de Mayo.
Cinco de Mayo! We have had Padnock on Cinco de Mayo, so that's all right. Wow, look at, we're busting the seams here, folks. Rick Strahl apparently has a draw. Who'd have thought that, right? How many people are here for the very first time ever? Medium. Yeah, that's less than I probably would have guessed. Well, welcome to Padnock. We don't always fill it this full, but it's usually doing all right. We typically have about 100 people out, 120 maybe. If you get to come out to the December meeting, it sometimes gets a little larger. We'll probably hit 300 this year. We get Mr. Hanselman presenting, and we've got some extra good swag. We even go crazy and don't get pizza and get Qdoba to take care of things. I know. I am excited, since I usually do a lot of the scheduling of humans. I'm very excited to see that we have a schedule out to February of next year.
Yes.
And I don't think there's any of them you wouldn't want to see. They are really good presentations and presenters. Tonight we have Rick Strahl presenting about Angular 4. That confused me a little bit because I'm thinking, wait a minute, aren't I still learning Angular 2? But a little bingling around, I realized, oh, okay, I guess we're skipping 3. Now, moving on. If perchance you don't know how to find Padnock other than in this building, here's some ways to find us. I'm going to move on now. Also, if you go to padnock.org, I've got links to most of those other things. This really is the access code. Now, all those people who are used to it are going like, wait a minute, that was there the whole time. Thank you, Darren, wherever you might be, because he had the code to us earlier. There you are. Wow, I'm so used to being over here. So Darren had that code to me early today, so I was able to put it right into the slide. Anyone else taking pictures still? You got that, Mike?
Yes, just a second.
Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Going. Andrew, come on. And we're gone. All right, let's do some appreciations. The very reason we're here is because Microsoft exists and created a little thing called .NET. Well, we've moved on and become a lot more than .NET nowadays. That's why I kind of refer to this as Padnock and not that old Portland area something or other. So, without Microsoft's efforts, though, we wouldn't be gathering here. Intel, again, thank you, Darren, provides us some great space. Next year, if Rick presents to us, we might have to go for the Jones Farm conference because we need a little more space, I think, tonight. SureWeb provides space on the web for our site. That's still not great, but yeah, well. We have swag to give away. I think we've got at least 3 out of 4 of these tonight. Thirsty Lion, we have a couple gift cards from them. Known Amelia's, we've got gift cards from them. And JetBrains, I've got 3 license slips. Now, I want to remind everyone, and Kelly, when you give it away later, consider saying this again. Go register it. We had a little trouble because we'd given several away and people hadn't gone through the process yet. And there's a link on this slip. Go read it because I actually had to pay attention to figure out how to do it. This is a little number that gets you a discount for the full price of the thing you buy. So you act as if you're buying it and then go put the number in and it goes to 0. Just so you know, 3 people are going to care about that tonight. We have our sponsors. In fact, we have 2 new ones tonight. New Relic. Woo! Welcome back. Matt's out there somewhere. Where are you? There you are. Stand up and plug yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm Matt from New Relic, I'm part of the recruiting team. We're glad to be back as a sponsor here and hiring for multiple .NET developers with C#, C++, and Azure experience, as well as our Windows tooling team is looking for full stack Microsoft developers.
Excellent. Very excited.
After party if anybody wants to talk.
Excellent, Matt. Bob Uva hinted about this last month, and I was like, well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Thank you so much for signing up. Well, since your buddy's right next to you, Vanderhouen, you want to go?
Well, for those of you that are the shady startups like New Relic. Yeah, so we've been doing this for a long time in Portland, and I've been coming here for a number of years as well. And I know a lot of you, but there's a lot of new faces in the room. We're recruiting for here in Portland, and we also have a lot going on. And regardless of whether you're looking, I'd love to say hello. So I think I'll probably just head over to the afterwards tonight.
Cool. Wow, that's double awesome. I'm very excited.
I know, I'm trying.
Silence, I know Eric's here.
Hello,
Hi, Eric.
we are Silence. We fight the cybersecurity battle with AI and machine models. And the company's located in Irvine, and we have an office here in downtown Portland at the World Trade Center.
Thank you. Sure ID? Someone from Sure ID tonight? Huh?
I'll take it.
You'll take it. Excellent.
Yeah. So I'm with Surety. Got a really great engineering department, and I'm pretty sure we still have a couple openings for software engineers, and also one for a front-end engineer. So I think I'll be at that party also if you want to come check me out. I've got my cards with me, and can tell you more about the company.
Thank you so much. I divided up the sponsors onto 2 slides this month because there's so many. Adroit Resources. Did Rena make it? No? Anyone named Rena in the audience? Well, Rena used to work with the Vanderhouen folks also. She got switched over to a new place, Adroit Resources, and she is excited to be a new sponsor. So I know she will be making a point to get out here. I think she had some challenges with childcare and such as life, but we'll be seeing her soon. Tech Systems, I know I saw where'd you Danielle go?
I'm here.
I hear the voice.
Hi.
Oh, hey, way up at the top.
Way up at the top. Hi, I'm Danielle from Tech Systems. We are the nation's largest IT staffing with over 110 offices nationwide. Here in Portland, we work with the largest, best companies, over 100. So I will also be at the after party and always buy a drink. It's expensive, but we're willing to do it for everyone if you'd like to talk to me as well.
Oh, careful.
I know.
I'll talk to you. You know. As long as you're buying me drinks, I'll be talking.
Every time. I love the crowd.
It's a good, and thank you, because you made a splash last month. Thank you very much, Danielle. Angelo, IT Motives.
Yeah, Angelo Seminary, IT Motives. By the way, I think I counted 149.
I like it.
Awesome, very nice.
We do technical recruiting in this town, and I'll tell you, we've had a real rush of new requirements lately, some great new partners that we're working with. So we'll be at the after hours. Alina Sconyers, the best damn technical recruiter in Portland in the house. If you haven't talked to if you talk to Alina, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you should get to know her. So bounce yourself.
And the best actress in the room, too.
And she's got a little card if you want to see it. So.
Sorry, I'm never going to let that go, you know that. It's a good thing. Home Depot. Scott, are you you're the Home Depot guy tonight, right?
Hey, Rich.
Excellent.
So the Home Depot Quote Center, we're located north of the river, and the news is that you've all probably heard we're planning on moving closer to the river. We're going to stay as the northern front, protecting you all from Seattle. So, if you're interested in learning more about the work we're doing, please come talk to me. I'll be here afterwards. So my core mission here as well. We got in early on the .NET Core train, and so we've got an implementation of .NET Core, and we're looking for more exciting work to come.
Thank you very much. and you do not have to be able to swing a hammer to work there. Do you? I'm right.
You kind of do.
Okay. Robert Half. Stephen, where, there you go.
Hi, everybody. My name's Steven, Robert Hack. Oldest and one staff department as well. We're working on a lot of great opportunities, a lot of very cool different industries we're trying to get into. Unfortunately, everything comes here for the next I've got Ryan here from our permanent placement team. I run our temp teams.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And I think we made it. We made it through that part. Thank you very much, everyone. Does New Horizons want to give themselves a plug? Do you want to? No? Okay, then we'll go with no. So I know we have a couple people from New Horizons visiting this evening, so. Up and coming events. Willamette Valley Software Engineering, Angelo, quick plug there.
So Ken from Treehouse is gonna be coming in. He really
You know
is a
this
big advocate of NoSQL. Yes, so one of James's peers. And it's gonna be a good meetup. If you wanna step out of town and come out to the country for one night, we'd love to have you.
And if you go to Salem, learn to say y'all, just so you know. I'm kidding. I'm kidding, Angelo. I've been to Salem many times, you know this. And I can say y'all. Squawk, anyone have a plug for Squawk? Your brother's not here. Angelo, do you know what's going on over there? I mean, other than advanced performance testing, featuring open source tool, Gatling.io, I don't know that stuff.
I would say that I believe that it's meeting at Puppet these days.
Okay,
It's either
cool.
Puppet or Crowd Compass.
Okay.
One of the two.
PadNut on May 16th, we'll have the West Side Geek Dinner, which is at the Washington Square Thirsty Lion. We had a great one last month, and actually both of the Geek Dinners were fabulous this last month. Downtown one we'll see in a second is May 23rd, the fourth Tuesday of the month. In between, we have the Portland Mobile.NET Developers Group, the Xamarin folk. They are meeting on May 17th. Anyone from over there in the audience that want to know what might be going on? Okay, good enough. Agile PDX, their big meeting is also on May 17th for viewpoints on SAFE. Don't know that one yet. Like I said, PadNug Geek Dinner. The SQL Server User Group on May 25th. Dennis, you go there, right? Sometimes, wherever you might be. There you go. Do you know what might be on the works?
No, I don't.
Okay, good enough. All these things are on Meetup too, so if you see it on these slides, you can find it on Meetup. Typescript, maybe someone knows what's going on for Typescript May 30th. Have you heard anything, James?
Yeah, so we have two presentations. I don't recall off the top of my head what they are.
Good enough.
One of them will be about TypeScript, I think.
That would be good.
If the spirit moves us to do that. Yeah, well, I'll announce details soon. So.
Will you be showing any TypeScript in your Angular presentation? Oh my gosh, look at that. It's like it was meant to be. Hey,
Awesome.
you should see if you can get another speaker in real quick, since you haven't announced anything. June 6th, the wonderful Jason Grigsby is going to be coming to present about progressive web to us. If you've been around a while, he used to lead the mobile user group. Just mobile, not .NET, excuse me.
Mobile Portland.
Mobile Portland, exactly. That was what it's called, Mobile Portland. And it was wonderful. I believe that during that period, that was my second favorite user group. So I am very excited to have him come out. And then in July, Kirk Davis and Paul Fryer. Now, some people might remember Paul Fryer did a Sonos presentation for us last year. Well, he is now with AWS. And if you've seen Chris Sells do his spiel with the Google, and you as a .NET developer, here's how you can use Google Cloud, etc. Well, that's basically what Kirk and Paul are going to be showing off. And they've got some really cool stuff on the microservice piece too. So that's just the beginning. Like I said, we're out through February. All of the presentations are extremely exciting. I'm trying to find spot. We might have to add more spots, and we have potential there. Now, once we're done here, Rick Strahl will be joining us at the after party at PadNut. I want to get a swag. Put your hands up high if you think you'll be joining us, and you probably should because it sounds like there few drinks are going to be provided too. So, thank you, folks. With very little and probably no further ado, Rick Strahl, come on down. Welcome back. Aloha, excuse me.
Aloha, yeah. I'm coming for the summeration, and I'm coming just at the right time for the Portland rain, right?
No, not tomorrow.
If you were hoping I was going to bring the sunshine, apparently not. Tomorrow, right? When I'm going back to Hood River. So I want to talk to you today about Angular applications with ASP.NET Core backends. So this is a pretty basic presentation. We're going to basically start at the very beginning with nothing, build something really small on the front end, connect it to the back end, and then go through it. So I'm trying to make this mostly hands-on. I have a few slides to get started with. So let me just get a show of hands. How many of you have used Angular 2 before, whether you looked at it or use it in a job? OK, so about half of you. How many have never even looked at it, at any version of Angular? OK, so that's almost the other half. OK, that's good. So this will be perfect. So I think even those of you that have used Angular before or .NET Core before, we're going to start at the very beginning with the command line for some things. So it's very low level to get started with. But I think everybody can get maybe a few tips and tricks out of this. That's about me. Who cares, right? So when we're talking about rich client application, which is what we're trying to build when we're using a tool like Angular on the front end, we're talking about building applications that run in the browser. So if you think back just like maybe 5 years or even 6 years back, think about how we were building web applications before we got to this rich client state. It's really not been that long that we've been building applications like this, right? Where we're trying to actually duplicate what we used to be able to do only on the desktop with client-side browser applications. And if you really think about it, for those of you that have played with these technologies, it's pretty amazing what you can do with the technology that is available and how much things have changed in that short span of time. I mean, before that, there was 20 years where we were building server-based UIs, right? I mean, we're using MVC or web forms or whatever other platform to build a server-based backend. And now we can actually do a lot of the things that we used to be able to only build in desktop applications on the web. And this is why this technology is so important, I think, that everybody who is still building server-based applications at the very least should be familiar with this technology and be able to use it. So when we're looking at these applications, we basically have an application that sits in the browser and runs and communicates with the server as a data backend. So in the old style of application, the server was both a data backend and a UI server, right? It was actually serving up HTML from the server. And every time you clicked a button, it went out and refreshed everything. Well, in this new world, we basically have the browser running like a desktop application and just requesting data from the server. So we're simply pulling JSON data, for the most part, down from the server and getting it into the client to display at some point. OK, so in this environment, the server really becomes something much more simple than it used to be. I mean, we used to have to build these applications with stateless scenarios, right? You used to have to keep track of where was I at on this last request when I clicked this button, right? You had to pass an ID so that you could make sure you restart your state and everything. Well, when you're running an application in the browser, that application actually lives in the browser and stays active until you actually physically navigate off of it. And what that means is that you can actually build stateful applications. You can pull down data, you can keep it on the client, and then actually do something with that data as you render it into the client. You can make changes to it and then update it at a later point in time with just data updates. So what travels over the wire is, generally speaking, much smaller than what we used to send over the wire with HTML. So what you can see in this view here is it's just kind of an overview of what a typical Angular application looks like on Windows or possibly even Linux. So on the other side of the spectrum there, we have ASP.NET Core, which is the second part of this presentation, which is Microsoft's new ASP.NET platform that is multi-platform, more high performance, and has the ability to potentially give us much better scalability if you move it into the cloud. You can run it inside of, on a Linux box, you can run it inside of Docker, and you can take advantage of all of these features that are available in modern web development. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with this that we simply weren't able to do previously, and that's pretty exciting if you think about it. If you've been a .NET developer and you've only been using it for Windows-based applications, now we can actually branch out and go a little bit further there. So in this whole picture here, when we're looking at this, you notice that there is a web server sitting in the middle between this browser application and the ASP.NET Core application. And it's actually important that you understand this part of it. When you run an ASP.NET Core application, you're running a console application that actually hosts its own web server inside of it. So ASP.NET Core now ships with the Kestrel web server, which is a server that is the default web server that you run when you run a ASP.NET web application. That particular server is very, very fast. At the lowest level, at the actual byte level of what it pushes out, it is much more efficient than IIS is for a lot of tasks. However, it's not a full-featured server like IIS is. So it can't do things like host headers. It can't do static file compression. It doesn't do kernel caching. It doesn't manage the running process in the way that an IIS application did. So an ASP.NET application that runs on a server somewhere needs typically a front-end server that actually communicates with the backend and sends it off to the backend request. So the web server here could be IIS on Windows, and all it's going to do is actually forward requests to that Kestrel application on the backend. Okay? So this is kind of the high-level overview of what we're going to look at. Now, we're not going to talk about all these pieces right now. We're going to start on the client first and then go into the server side. So when we start developing here, things look a little bit different. Okay, so we'll start on the client side with the Angular development part. So we create the JavaScript application first. And in order to do that, we'll run the development web server that comes with the Angular CLI. So the Angular CLI is a tool that is provided as an add-on for Angular that you can use to bootstrap a new application. You can say ng new, and it will create you a new application. And at that point, you have something that runs. And from there, you can then build components that make up your application. And we'll go through that process in a minute. But one of the things that the CLI also provides is this dev server that is basically a live reload server that you can run from the command line. You start it up, and then it runs, and it basically serves all the static resources for your application. Okay, so it serves index.html, all of your CSS, all of your JavaScript files, font files, anything that's static basically is served by that dev server. That server also detects any changes that you make to a JavaScript file, a CSS file, or an HTML template, and then automatically refreshes the browser. So if you've used Browser Sync with Visual Studio before, it's sort of like that, only a lot better and more reliable. Anybody use Browser Sync and ever got that to work reliably? Yeah? Reliably? Really? Yeah. Using it, everybody's probably tried it because it sounds really cool until you actually see it not work, right? So the dev server is a separate server from the backend server. So you're actually running two separate applications, right? You're running a client application and the dev server that it runs on. And then you're also running the ASP.NET Core application on the back end. And that application, these two applications are effectively two different domains. So when you actually run these two applications, you actually need to take care that you make sure that CORS works, HTTP access. Otherwise, you can't run it because you can't actually make the call from the client to the server over here. And we'll look at that when we look at the server piece. OK? So this kind of sets the stage of where I want to start here. OK, so Angular. Angular is described as a JavaScript application platform. So that's what they call it, actually. And that kind of gives it away, I think. Angular really is a very large piece of software that runs on the client side. And it is a platform because there's more involved than just a simple framework. What Angular tries to do is basically give you all the pieces you need to build a client-side applications. So there's other frameworks out there. And React is probably the biggest competitor today that give you a very small core engine, and then you go out and pick all the pieces that you need. With Angular, everything is kind of in one box. Everything is bundled as part of that platform that they ship to you. So when you build an Angular application, routing is built in, data binding is built in, form validation is built in, HTTP support is built in, the module handling is built in, and the way that you can break out an application into multiple modules. That's all built into the framework by itself. So the nice thing about a framework like Angular, or maybe some other ones like Ember or Aurelia, is that it's all packaged up and everything that you do kind of follows a consistent pattern. If you go down a path like React, then you actually have to spend the time to figure out which components do I need to do my data binding. Not the data binding, sorry. If I need form validation or the HTTP client or whatnot. So there's different ways that you can approach these things. And in Angular, for me personally, I like the fact that this is an ecosystem that has most of the things that you need built into it. So there's a ton of features, and I'm not going to go over these in detail here. I'll talk about them as we hit them when we look at the sample. So as I mentioned, the way to get started with Angular is kind of overwhelming. Okay, so for those of you that have used Angular before, did you think it was easy to get started with it? Nope. But things have gotten easier, believe it or not. So rather recently, the Angular CLI was updated to version 1.0. And the CLI actually gives you access to something that creates you a starter application. And that has all the moving parts in it that you need in order to run that application. Now, when you first get that starter application, you have a boatload of files that you're looking at. And the first reaction may be, oh my God. Because there's a lot of stuff that is actually happening behind the scenes to make that process easy. So now my recommendation is go with what the CLI provides you, and don't get bogged down in the details when you get started. Okay, there's a lot of moving parts in Angular, but if you follow the guidelines and the recipes that they give you in the walkthroughs, and you just get started, you'll see very quickly how you can be productive, even though there's all this other stuff that you may not understand right then and there. Okay, so as you can see here, there's a number of commands you can use to actually use with the Angular CLI. So you can say ng-new to create a new project. You can use ng-serve to bring up the dev server that I showed earlier. You can use ng-build to build a production build. And you can use ng-generate to generate new components to add into your application. Okay, and then the ng-generate, for example, if you hook up a component, it will do all the hookups in the right places so that you can just start writing code at that point. Okay, so should we take a look and try this out? We're done with the slides for a minute here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start writing up something from scratch. So we're going to use the Angular CLI, which I already have installed on this machine. And I'm going to say ng-new. Yep. We'll see how we do with blowing things up. So ng-new, and I give it a name of the project that I want to create. So this is going to be a to-do project. And I'm going to add routing to this. Okay, there's a bunch of flags that let you specify additional features that you can add to this. Now, the most important one here is the routing one. And basically what it does, it hooks up a module so that you can hook up custom routes to the individual pieces of your application that you can load. So now we wait. Because what happens here right now is that it's basically created a template. It put all the files there. And in the background here, even though it's not showing, it's actually going out to NPM and downloading 120 megs worth of stuff. Welcome to JavaScript development, right? It doesn't matter whether you use Angular or you use React or you use Aurelia. Most of these tools that you use these days to do this, they take a boatload of dependencies, both dev and actual runtime dependencies. This is actually super fast for how fast it ran here.
Intel network.
Really? Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, this is fast. OK, so if I now go into my to-do project here, I should be able to say ng-serve and actually start up the dev server. So I'm on the command line, right? So it's going to compile my project now. And then I can go to localhost 4200. OK, we're ready to go home, right? That's very dynamic, by the way, right? So what happened here? Well, behind the scenes, what actually happened is it generated me a whole bunch of files for me. So if we go into the to-do folder here, this is going to be probably a little hard to see, but there is basically a project that was generated for us. Actually, let me open this up in my editor here. So I'm going to use WebStorm. Oops, that didn't work. What? Yeah. I'm not actually typing that, though. I'm just pressing enter. There we go. So you can use any editor that you choose. So you can use Visual Studio for this if you want. I don't recommend it. It's really not the best choice for JavaScript and TypeScript. But it does work for the kind of development that we're doing here. You can use Visual Studio Code, which is an excellent editor as well for this sort of development. Personally, I like WebStorm primarily because it has extremely good IntelliSense, and it has auto-completion for pulling down references and inserting them much more reliably than any of the other tools that I've worked so far with so far. So how's the font for this? Is that big enough? OK. OK, so if we look at this, let me see here. I need to actually open the right tool. So let's go to To-Do and open that. I'm going to have to boost that again, I guess. OK, so what it generated is all of this stuff right here. Now, there's a boatload of stuff that was generated, right? And if you look at this, when you first come to this, you might be going, oh my God, what is all this stuff, right? But again, if you follow the recipes and just go and make the changes to actually make the application work and make the changes to do the initial stuff that I'm going to take you through, I think you'll find that you can be very productive without actually having to understand all of what's going on here right now. As you start working with the technology, then you can go back and actually figure out what are all the pieces and how does it flow through here. If you don't do this, which is what we all had to do not too long ago because the Angular CLI wasn't there and the starter projects were all a little funky, you had to actually figure out how it works. You had to use Webpack manually. But now the Angular CLI actually wraps Webpack, for example, which is a build technology to actually compress and bundle all the files up. It wrappers that in such a way that the 90% case is covered. So when you get started, you have everything you need to actually run and build an application. And as you can see, we had our app works, right? That's all we need to know. OK, so let me see if we can put this up over here in such a way that we can actually see everything. Let me go over here. All right, so where is this actually happening? So we got two places here. Let me boost the font again a little bit. OK, so the actual components where this is defined, oh, that was the wrong one, app component.ts. It's, nope. Bloody hell. Here's the code that actually gives me that very dynamic piece of code, right? It says app works. Well, if I want to change this, I can just go in now and say hello from Padnock. And if everything goes well, I can save, and it changes immediately. Okay, so that's the live reload server that I was talking about, right? It's monitoring the changes that I'm making to the JavaScript and HTML templates. And as I work here, as I make changes here, those changes are immediately reflected. So let's go in here, and let's add something else. Let's add a time and say new date. Okay, so I save that into my component. So what we're looking at here, just to be clear, is a TypeScript class that is an Angular component. And what makes up this particular component is the import statement at the top, which is all the dependencies that you pull into your Angular page. So this will load files from this. And this is how the dependency tree works in this TypeScript-based world. Basically, you reference another file, and that file gets referenced and pulled into the project. And when the build system builds your project, it automatically puts that file into the final bundles that it generates. So this is actually a very important point, because this was one of the things that was really difficult in old school JavaScript, right? If you're using ES5 code and you don't use modules, it's really difficult to make sure that all your script dependencies are properly aligned and whatnot. Using TypeScript or ES 2015, the newer JavaScript flavors, you do get this module logic in your applications to take advantage of, and it will automatically pull in all the pieces that you need, and your dependencies are managed where it matters, where you can see what goes with what. Okay? And the second part there's a component header there, which is metadata. So this is Angular specific metadata that describes what the component should look like. So it basically gives you a selector, which is the components tag. That's the HTML tag that you can use to embed that into the page. And you can see that here if we go to the index page. There is an app root component here, and that's the component that we're loading into that page. So that component that we're using, it gets loaded into that index page, and that's the root component. And then inside of the root component, you can put other things and nest further components into it. So Angular is based on component technology, just like React is, really. It's just using a slightly different approach to do that. OK, so if we go back to our component here, the next part then is an actual class. So this is a TypeScript class, or an ES 16 to 2015. 2016, right? It's ES6. Let's go with that. It's an ES6 class, or actually it is a TypeScript class, but the syntax is actually the same. So that comes back to what we were talking about earlier, TypeScript. Angular uses TypeScript by default, but you can use ES6 to do the same thing. Okay, and the documentation actually shows both. Now, I personally like to use TypeScript because it's just a superset of JavaScript. So all the ES6 logic works in here, and then you get additional features on top of it. So essentially, the big feature here is that we can use these type annotations. So if you don't use TypeScript, then these annotations actually have to be written as functions. So the annotations actually make this much easier on the eyes. And the second thing then is that in TypeScript, you can specify type names. So you can actually define a class of a type and then reference a parameter or a property value with that given type. And what that does is when the linter goes through and actually checks for everything and the TypeScript compiler runs over that code, it can give you compile time errors when you don't match up something. So it gives you some extra security of strong typing. But the nice thing about TypeScript really is it's optional, right? It works with ES5, it works with ES6, and it works with the TypeScript extensions. So it's actually something that you can take advantage of even if you don't use the specific TypeScript syntax. OK, so what I did here is I added a time property to that class, right? So now we can go back into the template, and I can go in here and say now, let's say small, time is time. Save that, and there's my time. OK, dynamic binding. I didn't have to write any code, right? So I added a property. It automatically bounded to that interface. Now let me format that a little bit nicer. Zoom that out a little bit. And let's go, let's pipe it. So that's kind of like a filter. So let's take that and put it into a date filter, and then say day, SS. OK, we'll save that, and there's my formatted date. OK, so that's the same, similar to what we do in .NET to string on a date, right? So very similar. It's pretty nice, right? So let's make that a little bit more dynamic. So let's add a constructor here. And what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to say set interval, and then create a function, and use an arrow function here, and then put some logic in here to update. Oops. I forgot to turn off my pad. Yep, I should really do that. this dot time equals new date. And I'm going to say 1000. Okay, so what that will do is it will now loop around every second and update the time, right? And if we look closely here, that didn't work. Oh, it does work. No?
Put it in H1.
Yeah, no, the problem is it's the root component, so sometimes you have to just refresh the entire page, and sometimes the controller needs to be rerun. God, I hate that when that happens. Always doing a demo, right? Let me make a change here. Come on. Now it works, see? I didn't change anything, but it just works. So this kind of problem is mainly due because I'm working on the root component. Okay, so that's the very root component that gets loaded into the page. Once you start working with the actual components that live in the application tree, that sort of problem typically doesn't happen. So there's some sort of weird condition that they have in there, and that is not met by making that small little change that I make. And I've seen this when I was going through these demos actually as well. But you can see, again, it's pretty cool if you think about it, right? What are we doing here? We're basically assigning a time value, and every second we're updating that time value, and it's being reflected right there without writing any sort of code. All we're doing is we're updating the model, and Angular is detecting that the model is changing and immediately showing that value.
Can you clarify where the update is actually running? Is it running in the server or in the client?
It's running on the client. So the Angular is actually looking at the model, and every time an event fires, so in this case the set interval counter, it goes, looks at the model and says, has something changed? And if it does, if it has changed, then it goes ahead and re-renders those portions of the model that have changed. So the way that it works is that there's a client-side data binding manager, shall we say, that looks at the model at any point in time. Whenever an event is fired, it goes out and compares, and then it renders that out in one place.
So constantly having a conversation with the server, though, to see if the code has changed.
No, there's no server involved. We're not doing anything with the server here. This is all client-side, and the model that we're looking at is running in TypeScript on the browser. Okay, so it's all on the client. There's no server involved. We haven't even touched the server at this point. The only thing that's coming from the server right now is index.html and the CSS and the images and whatnot. Okay? Okay, so you can also go in here, and let's hopefully we'll have better luck with the changes I make here. So let me add a name here. And, oops, linting rule error. So if I go to the HTML here, in my, not in my index file, in my file over here, I'm going to go in and add an HR and add a label, name, and then we create an input box, and we'll call it name equals name, ID equals name. And we're going to bind it. And I'm going to bind it by doing, so here's some of the things that you can do with WebStorm. So it has that nice auto-completion for things. So I can give it an expression. I can say I want to bind to the name. Okay, so we have a name property in our model, and we're binding to that right away. And there you can see the value has been bound to that name. Okay, so there's a name in the model on the component, a property called name, and it's set to Rick, and we'll see that reflected right here, right? So if I go in and now put in here a, actually, well, let me pull in some additional files to get some formatting here. Where do I want this from? Oops. Let me pull in some dependencies here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my Angular CLI configuration, and I'm going to add some additional dependencies that I'm going to render into this page. Okay, so you can see here once I paste this, I'm dropping Bootstrap, jQuery, Toaster, and Font Awesome in here. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and I'm going to bring up a terminal inside of WebStorm here because it's a little easier to work with. Okay, so I'm going to shut this other terminal down. I'll bring this up a little bit. And so now what I have to do is I actually have to import those things because NPM didn't pull these originally. So these are additional dependencies. You can kind of think of that as libraries in .NET that we're pulling in. So I'm going to install jQuery. Actually, save. jQuery, Bootstrap, Toaster, and Font Awesome. Is that all of them? Okay, so that's going to go out, download those, and pull those down locally now. So now these are actually imported here in this CLI piece that says I have a bunch of styles, right? And a bunch of scripts that get embedded into the page. So this is how I'm actually referencing those components that now get pulled into the page. Now, why am I doing this here rather than putting this into the index.html page? Anybody want to venture a guess? Pardon? Bundling. Yeah, bundling and packaging, right? So Webpack will actually pick this up at this point. So the Angular CLI, when it builds, will pull these files in and automatically compress them and bundle them.
So is there not, I noticed you have the Angular CLI JSON file. There's not a package.json file, so you can't just put it as a dependency in your package file and then run it?
Yes, there is a package.json. There is one there. And so when I did the save, it actually put it in package.json, right? So this is using, so the Angular CLI file is an abstraction that runs on top of Webpack, so that you don't have to deal with the low-level semantics of Webpack. You can actually still use Webpack after you've built this. You can eject, and it will actually let you get at the raw Webpack file. But for 99% of the cases, we should be able to just do that. OK, so now I have my CLI running again. So I have to actually rerun my server here. So I'm going to run ngserve one more time. OK, so it's going to start back up. OK, it takes a second the first time, and then I can just refresh this page. OK, so now I'm going to just hide this. And let's go back to our HTML page here, the component page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and say I want to use a BS3, oops, what is it, BS3 alert. And let's use an info1. And let's say name here, oops. And right? Ugh. Save that. And there's my name. OK? So if I type here, it shows up immediately, which is nice, right? The binding is automatic. So as soon as we make a change, it updates the model behind it. So it's writing back into the component property. And as it updates, it immediately updates in that text box and then also updates anywhere where it's bound. So if I put it somewhere else, let's say I put it up here too. OK, save again. As I type, it goes into both places. That's pretty cool, right?
So the dependencies that you set up, like when you run in jQuery and the font library, is there a way to automatically have those pulled down by NPM instead of you manually having to restore those packages, similar to what .NET does when you have packages when you save
Sure. And just like the lady over here was saying, is you can put it into package.json, and once it's there, then you do your npm install, it'll just be there, right? So at this point, if I restore this application after I saved it and restore it, it will automatically be in there because I did the -- save. So it added it to package.json at this point. So if you put it into some other, if you put it into a GitHub repo and pull it down, it will just work. OK? So this is pretty cool, right? I mean, we're not writing any code to update the UI. All we're doing is we're talking to a model. We're updating the model, and then the data updates here. Any questions on this so far?
or is it a refresh?
Nope,
or-
it's events. Whenever there's an event, so Angular basically hooks into the event pipeline of the browser, and whenever an event fires, any sort of event that is a UI event or an interval event like the interval that we were firing, or if you generate a custom event as part of your application, it will do the comparison.
Right, but how does it know that your code on the server has changed, needs to be re-downloaded?
Well, but that's your responsibility. So we're not doing that yet, right?
But you're saving something in your editor. How does the browser know you just saved something?
Well, you have to update your model at that point. So when you, okay, let me back up here. So if you have data, let's say you pull down a whole list of items and then you make a change to something, you send it to the server, and then immediately you will have to go in and make that change on the client side. So either you can go and say, give me the new list from the server that the server gives you, or you can say, I'm going to just take the values that I have in my object here and update my list with that value. So you can insert into the list or replace it with the item that you've just edited and updated. Okay? All the changes that you make usually, though, in an Angular application will be live. So you make that change, and as soon as you make that change, it shows up. So even as you type, the value of that item changes. And then if you decide to update it on the server, then you send it up to the server.
I think he may be asking, though, about how your changes in the editor are getting sent over to the server. And that's your Angular reference server from your API.
Oh, yeah, it's coming from the development server.
Right, so is the browser
Oh, you mean...
open connection waiting for...
I'm sorry. I totally misunderstood your question.
I thought what you were thinking first.
Yeah. So it's using WebSockets. Okay. So the browser is running the dev server has something running inside of it that monitors as you are making changes, and it tells it to update the code files. So, and when it actually does is it doesn't recompile everything, it only injects the pieces that have changed. So it knows what the module names are, and then based on the module, or not even the module names, I think it's the class names, the component names that get replaced.
Yeah, and that's a development time only thing.
That's a development time thing, and that's a very good point, yeah.
You could do that with JavaScript using the key up event. Maybe that's what it's using?
Yeah, it's the key up event that triggers the change. So that's the first thing we were talking about. But then the second piece is the WebSocket thing. So we want to do one more thing here, though, and then we can move on to the next thing. And that's basically, if I go in here and I clear this out, wouldn't it be nice if this didn't show up at all, right? I mean, at this point, we kind of conditionally want to make this work only if there's actually something there. So I can say ngIf, which is a directive, an Angular directive. And I can say name, OK? So if the name is truthy, then it's going to show. If it's not truthy, in other words, if it's empty, then it's not going to show. OK? So it didn't like that because there's a capital problem here. And I thought I typed it that way. OK, so there it is. Right? We can still make changes, but now when I wipe it out, the box goes away. OK? So there's other things that you can do that are very similar to this. For example, you can affect CSS classes. So the class directive, you can say ng class, and then if a condition is true, that class shows, otherwise it doesn't. And we'll see an example of that. OK? All right, any questions on this so far? OK, so let me take all of this out except let's keep the date up here. Oh, no, not the off button. I hate it when I do that. Who's ever done that? Yeah, that's smart Apple design, isn't it? Sorry about that. That was bound to happen, right? OK, so I'm taking everything out of here except for the date at this point. OK? So now the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to start up another terminal over here. And I'm going to say ng generate component to do. OK, so I'm going to create a to-do component. So what this will do, it will now create inside of my application here a new folder with a component inside of it. OK, and there's also ways that you can generate this into an existing folder. So there's a flat command line that you can say. You can actually give it a path, and it will put it into the right place. A little hard to see those colors, I'd say, huh? Okay, so if you can't see it, what is there is actually a component file, so a TypeScript file, an HTML file, and a CSS file. And those files basically hold a new component that was created. Okay, so that component has an app to do tag that you can use, and I can put that into a page somewhere. Okay, so I can put that into a component. So if we go into our app component here, I can now put down here app to do, save, and I should get to do works. Okay, again, there's that highly informative piece of information that, okay, it's time to go home now. We've done the to do piece, right? It works. Hey, it's there. So there's nothing there, of course. But then if I want to put some logic inside of that, I can certainly do that. Okay, so what we want to do here is now in this to do component is actually generate some more instructive logic. But before we do this, let me generate another component just so we can see routing as well. So let me ng generate component about.
Is this suggested syntax or the naming convention for selector app dash?
Selector app dash.
So in your component.
Yeah, that's what it generates. That's just their convention. You don't have to use that. You can change that any way you want.
I didn't know if that was the suggested convention.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, they're using the style guide, the Angular style guide for this. All the templates do. So this is what they're suggesting, I guess. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the app prefix. That just seems like noise to me. But they do recommend that you use something with a dash in it. So use your name of the application. So if it's, whatever, some shortcut for it. OK, so if we go in here now, we have a to-do component, an about component. And if I go and put that into the app component here, we can go app. OK, so if we run that, this should show up there as well. So now both of those components are on the page. And you can put the same component on the same page multiple times. Right? I mean, that's what component development is, right? And that is what makes this really cool. Can anybody see how this really makes the development process so much easier? Because what we're doing here is we're creating very small components that have their own logic attached to it, and then we're taking those little components and mashing them together into something a little bit bigger. And then something bigger and bigger and bigger. So every piece of code that you write is just a small self-contained piece of code that is easy to get your head around, easy to test perhaps, if you're doing your testing. And it's just a wonderful way to actually abstract everything in smaller and smaller pieces.
So component-wise, at this point, you kind of have two anonymous instances, one instance and one about instance, right?
Correct.
And then you could add names to it and reference the names.
Right. And you can add properties to this thing, and then the outer components can communicate via the properties and attributes that you map to this. So you can basically pass data into these components, and we'll see how to do that. OK? So that's one way you can reference these. So one way is via their tags, right? The other approach is you can use the routing module. So the routing module here that was added to this application when I did -- routing is basically a mechanism that lets you do client-side routing. So when I say /to-do, it should go to the to-do page. If I say /about, it should go to the about page. OK, so what we can do here is we can add a routing path into this routing module. So I can go in here and say path to-do. And then I want a component. And I want to name that, it's going to be the to-do component. And again, here's where I really like WebStorm, because it will tell me exactly what I need to import at this point. So why is that red? We need to know what that reference is, right? So this is TypeScript and the actual typing that we're using. So it knows there's a to-do component because WebStorm is actually going through, looking at all the TypeScript files and finding that component. And I can just say, press Alt-Enter, and it will import the to-do component right here. Right? So it's pulling it in from that other location, and it's then available in our application. And by doing this, this will now get bundled into the final application bundle. So it's all automatic, right? So when you build the application, it's all there. You don't have to do anything special to make that work. OK, so that's my to-do component there. Let me Jesus, come on. There we go. And then the other one would be, let's just copy this one. I'm fumbling with my. So then we do an about. And the about component. Really? OK, Alt-Enter. And it's been imported. Oh. OK, save that. So now, nothing's really changed. We still have those two components there. But now I can say to do. And we haven't actually pointed it at the router outlet. So let me actually take this out of here. So if I go into the app component, let me take these two guys out of here. OK, so the way that this works now is there's a router outlet here. OK, so that's the place where the views that are being requested by the routing will go. OK, so if I go to about here, in theory, if this all works the way it should. Yeah, it doesn't. Of course not. Yeah, but it's not actually an error. It's just a linting error, I think. This one here. Yeah. And again, we're still at the root component, which is part of the reasons that this is so funky. So no, let me just restart this here. Let me just do an ng serve. It is actually doing that automatically. Good point. So let me actually point that out. So when you create a new component, you need to actually register that component as part of the module loader that actually brings everything in. And the reason for that is so that the application knows what components are actually available. So when you put those tags into your page and say app to do, it needs to know where is that coming from. So in order to do that, you need to register your component in the app module.ts. And that goes right here. So here's those two components. And when I did ng generate, it generated that automatically for me. It automatically put it in there. OK, let me try this again now that we restart it. And there it is. OK, so overlook this, this little concern with the live server. It's mainly because we're working on the root component, which you normally don't work on. OK, so you just do your initial setup, and then it's usually good. So it's a lot more impressive when it works, though, I can tell you that. OK, any questions on this so far?
So when you change your route to about, is it also refreshing the top portion? Because that's what I had a problem with, like putting a menu, say, in my app component, and then it was constantly refreshing the whole page, even above the route outlet.
It shouldn't. It should only just flip that router outlet. Because it's replacing just what's inside of there.
That's what I thought it should be.
OK, so how can we actually do this in a, so if we actually wanted to, we probably want to have some sort of navigation here at the top. So, pardon? We lost it?
So does that routing occur in the browser?
Yes.
Normally
So,
when you change the URL, doesn't that do a page fetch?
right, so this is happening in the browser. So this uses HTML5 push state. And that's what's actually managing this. So if you were to refresh right now on this page, it's going to handle this because it will actually run against the dev server that knows about this. So when you go to the server, it will actually serve you index.html. So the server has to be smart about this, right, in order for this to work. Because if you do a refresh with a deep link into the site, it needs to know that it needs to bring back index.html and not some route that is actually a server route.
Right, but when you type whack about and just hit
Yeah.
enter,
Yeah.
does that re-retrieve index HTML from the server?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
So it does. Yeah, there's also a # syntax. So that's the other way of doing. So it's called hashbang routing. And you can set that up. And that works on anything. So you don't need server-side support for it. It looks a little bit uglier, though. And so a lot of people don't like that. And it's also more efficient to use the HTML5 routing. So typically what you do is you set up on your server So in IIS, you can set up some rewrite rules that basically say only the API calls, forward those to Kestrel. Everything else that's not a file, physically serve index.html. OK? You can also do that on your server-side application. OK, so I added a button here. And we're going to say, let me move this out of the way here. So inside of here, we're going to say to do. And then we're going to copy this. I'm having problems with this. So I can say router link equals to do. So that basically tells it that I want it to go to that link. And then if I paste this here and I say router link about and about, and we save, we should see the button, hopefully. Nope, I don't know why. There it is. And still uppercase. What the heck? I need to be sitting for this, I guess. So if we do about, to do, about, to do, about, to do. OK? And again, there's no code, right? I mean, you have to set up that one routing where you say this route goes to this component, and then it puts it into the router outlet and updates it. So very straightforward there. Yeah. Yeah, because now we're just hitting an HTML route, right? We're routing to an HTML. So the browser Angular sits there and looks at push date events. And as soon as you navigate, it knows, OK, this is a route. I'm going to go navigate you here. But if I do a full refresh, then it goes to the server and pulls back up an index page. So that was probably the question somebody else had earlier, too. Yeah. OK. Sorry that I missed that. And I get it now. OK, so let me pull a little bit more stuff in here. So I have this project, by the way, it's on GitHub. So what we're working on here, you can look at afterwards. OK, so the link will be given at the end here. So what I want to do is I want to go to the to-do page here, and I'm going to pull in the CSS, which I'm going to need. And if I go into my app here locally, to-do, let's just pull this to-do component over here. OK, so this is going to just pull in some dependencies for the CSS that we're going to use. And I'm also going to go in here and cheat a little bit with some HTML while we're thinking of it. Well, actually, let's not. Let's do that differently. So if we go into the component here, what I want to do is I want to start doing something with a little bit of data. So let me go in here and copy some data out. So we have some commented data here. So I'm going to take that over into WebStorm. And I'm going to go to my class in my to-do component. I'm just going to paste that in here. And I'm going to say to-do of to-do item equals this list of data that I just pulled here. So I'm going to say control. So there is a list of to-do items. And notice here that it says that there is a to-do item that's not defined. And that's basically a TypeScript class that I'm going to pull from this as well. So I'm going to scroll down here. I'm going to just pull this class here. And I'm going to bring that over here and just put it at the bottom. OK, so I'm basically creating a strong type that describes my data type. OK, so I have a title, I have a description, and I have completed. And then I have an array of that called to-dos that we're going to display in the UI. OK? You with me so far? So right now, we're not doing anything with that. So let's close everything but this, because I'm declaring bankruptcy already. Because I can't, it's just too big. No, that's not the about one we want. We want, I did that in my other walkthrough. So here's the to-do. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go in and say div class equals to-do item. OK, and then I'm going to create a div class equals, whoops. What? Not again. I got to sit down. That's funny, huh? Okay, so to-do header. And we put in here each one of the items that we want to actually loop through. So let me zoom this out a little bit. And so what we want to do here is we want to loop through all the items that are actually in this to-dos list. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to say ng2 and use the ng4. And I'm going to say to. Why does that not work? To-do of to-dos. Okay, so that gives me a to-do item. And then here I can now say to-do dot title. Okay, and then I can say div class. Well, let's just do div dot to-do content, I believe it is. And we can say to-do dot description. Okay, save that. All right, so it gives me an error here. It says, notice that there's error handling. Hey, if you've used Angular 2 when you first started out, that was not the case. Okay, so here it's actually telling me there's a runtime error. Okay, and it's basically telling me that there is a type conversion error of some sort. So what's happening here is I have completed. Oh, why is that breaking? That shouldn't be breaking. Property title is missing at 10.3. What?
To do item array.
Oh. Oh, yeah. Thank you. It still fails to compile though, huh? Why is it failing though? It's not refreshing again. So this has been super stable, but I went in and reinstalled the Angular CLI and all the components that go with it, which actually went backwards for me because I upgraded to a later version. And so there's my list. Okay? So it seems like the new server, there's something a little bit freaky about it that used to just work a whole lot better. Okay? So it's rendering that list now. Okay? It's pretty cool. Again, right? No explicit binding. All we're doing is we're just telling it that we want to basically have our components show this list. Okay, so now we can do some other interesting things in here. We can go in and say, for example, let's toggle the state of this. So actually, there's one other thing here. There's a couple of items in here that are already completed. So what we can do is we can say ng class. So I'm going to do ng2 class. And it creates that for me. And I can say completed. And then the expression. And what is it going to be? Well, to do completed. OK, save that. And now notice that one item that is not completed is automatically showing with the completed style. It's pretty cool, right? And so ng class, you can specify multiple classes in here. And then based on some expression that's true or false, that class will get embedded into the page. OK? So then we can also say maybe pull left. And I'm going to go in here and say FA pencil square O. So that's creating this pencil UI. So there's a list. And then I can say here that I want to click on this. So I want to put a click handler on it. And I say toggle completed and to do. Now that doesn't exist yet, but we can go into our component and now create that method. So let's say toggle completed. Put a to do as a parameter. So we take the scope of that object that we're looping through and we're passing it into this component. And then we say to do dot completed equals not to do dot completed. Oops, that's weird. No, that's right. Oh, why did it do that? That's weird. Yes, fat fingers. Typing. So, of course it doesn't work. So did I save the other one? As always the. Excuse me? Well, it's not working anyway, so I lost it on purpose. I wonder why. Why is it?
Back now. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's doing that. I'm sure it's Angular's fault.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it's not working, so that must be it. So I don't understand why that isn't working. So I mean, that should just work. So let me restart the server again. So it seems like it loses connection with the server sometimes, and it doesn't detect that there's a change being made. And it's funny because I've gone through this demo a million times, and it works every time except here, right? So there. So it's not me, at least, right? I can blame it on the Angular CLI. It is working, which is good. So we can see as I click on it, it actually changes. Right, so we can do some interesting stuff here as well with ng class. So if I say ng2 class, oops. Let me do that one more time. ng2 class. And if we say here, so what was it? FA pencil square. Oh, yeah, I should have just copied that O. And so to do completed. Actually, if it's not completed, right? And the other way around, we can say FA check if it is completed. OK? And then I'm going to take this pencil thing out of here. And I don't think it likes the break here.
You've got a quote and a double quote.
And back here. Oh, yeah, why is that? That's crazy. Fat fingers. There we go. OK, so now we got a checkbox showing, right? So as I click, it goes back and forth between these two values. Pretty nice. Hey, thank you. Oh, that gets a clap. Really? OK, well, it worked, right? That was the nice thing. It actually worked when I made the change. It didn't have to restart. So if I do another one here, let's do a class equals pull right. So we'll pull it over to the other side. And I'm going to do FA remove, I believe. And on the click here, what we want to do is we want to do remove to do. And we pass the to do in. OK, so what do you think we do here? We remove the to-do. We remove the to-do. What do we do here? Yeah, of course. All right, so all we really have to do is we say this dot to-dos equals this dot to-dos dot filter. And we pass in the TD as a parameter there. And then we compare the TD to, whoops. Shit. I hate it when that happens. I really should have turned that keyboard off. Maybe I should do that still. Let's do that. Let's turn off that bloody mouse driver. Ah, no. Yes, I do, because we haven't had enough problems yet. Not equal to do. So what that's doing is basically telling, so it's using an arrow function. So that's a ES6 construct, right? It's basically like a lambda that just executes that one command. So what it's doing is it's saying, filter the list of to-dos and give me all the items that are not equal to that to-do item that we passed. So we're basically taking the list, copying it out again with the new list. So if we save that and we hit the remove button over here, it goes away. I mean, how cool is that, right? I mean, we're not writing any code for the UI. It just kind of happens, right? You modify the collection. And notice here, if you've used previous versions of Angular, you had to probably do something to make that happen because we're messing with the children in the collection, right? But here we're actually replacing, in this case, we are actually replacing the entire collection. But when we toggled the complete value, we just triggered a property, basically, inside of one of the to-dos. And it detected that. So it knows how to walk the tree and do all of that automatically. So if you've used Angular 1 and you were really not too happy about having to scope apply before, that's kind of going away. There is no scope apply for that matter. So the only way that you get the model to refresh is to actually fire an event, and that causes the module to refilter. OK, so let's pick up a little bit more code here. Let me see if I have my to-do component here. And let's add some more HTML into the page. And let's go back over here. Let's go into the component and paste this. And let me also go all the way to the top here. And I got to sit. So let's do div class equals container. And let's jump to the end. And save that. OK, so we got a little bit of space here. So that looks a little bit better. And if we reload the page completely, we should get our to-do list. And why are we not seeing the to-dos? What did we break? Well, if I reload the page, it's going to reload them, right? Because every time they're still here. But so now we get that. Did I not? We didn't change anything. So let's see if there's any errors here. So let's bring up the browser tools. And there is. So there's clearly some error that occurred. So let's see here. It says type error cannot write property title. OK, so we're binding to something that is not actually there yet. So let me see here. Let me look at the HTML. Yeah, there's no active to-do. OK, so what we need here in this component is we need an active to-do. So that's the one we're editing. And I'm going to type that as a to-do item. And I'm going to say new to-do item. OK, so what I'm doing is I'm adding another property to my model in the component. And I'm telling it that I want to bind that. So now if I refresh this page here, or I should just be able to save, hopefully, and go to to-do, now there's my to-do list. OK, so the reason it wasn't working is because it was binding against something that just wasn't there. There's an object there, and it gave me a runtime error, essentially. Right? So again, TypeScript, yay. It kind of helped us find that, right? Because it was actually telling us exactly what we needed to look at. It told me it was the title that was the problem. OK, so this should all still work, right? The same as it did before. So now I should also be able to type here. And notice that there are some rules that are applied to this, which is kind of nice. You notice the Save To Do button is actually disabled at this point. So this is Angular form validation. And you can use it very easily using standard HTML markup requirements, for example. So this is the required class. Here's the min length 10. There's a required for this. So it has to be at least 10 characters long before it accepts it. OK? And Angular, when you connect to a particular form, will actually allow you to specify a number. Actually, internally, it uses a number of CSS classes that automatically then are mapped to CSS styles that do these highlights. So as you go through, you can define a form. Where's the actual form? Here's the form. And you basically assign the form to a variable. So you say form1 becomes a variable that is now scoped inside of here. And then I can reference that form. And I can say form.invalid. And that will tell me whether the form is valid or not. So until the form is valid, I cannot submit it. And how does that work? Well, there's a button down here. And inside of here, we can check to see whether that button is enabled. So notice here there's a disabled, form1 invalid. And if it's invalid, it doesn't show. So as soon as it becomes valid, that button enables automatically. I can click it, and we can go on from there. OK? Pretty nice, right? So how do we add something here? So there's already a method called save to do. So let's actually add that here. So save to do. Anybody want to take a guess of what we have to do here? Just a push or an unshift, really, yeah? We want to put it at the top of the list. So we say this dot to-dos dot unshift to do. OK? Save. OK, so let's type. Save. There it is. Nice? Yeah? Easy, right? So it's a very, very simple example, obviously. But I mean, there's tremendous power in what you can do with this, right? Because you're abstracting this all the way into a component that is fully self-contained. You make a change to the model reflects immediately in the HTML template. Question?
So the form validation that you showed in terms of like required fields and whatnot, is there a notion of model validation like you have in MVC?
Yes, you can actually build custom validators. But typically, you will want to do your hardcore validation on the back end. Right? I mean, you sent the data to the back end and only do the simple validations in the front end. Or if you really want to, you can create custom validators and do it. So, but I would recommend seriously doing it on the server. OK, any questions on this so far? OK, let's shift gears and let's go to the server side. OK, let me flip back over to my slides here. How are we doing on time? Where's Rich? He wasn't very specific about how long we can go.
Got until 8:30.
8:30? OK, half an hour. That should be perfect. Maybe.
Kind of half an hour.
Huh?
Kind of half an hour.
OK, good. Huh? OK. So what we want to do now is we want to take the to-do list and then actually throw some data from the server and pull it. So I'm going to do the same thing that we just did on the client. I'm going to go into the command line, create a new application, a web API, and then hook that up with some simple data that we can serve, and then go through some of the issues that we're going to run into, like the course that won't be there. OK? So when we're talking about ASP.NET Core, I already talked about it a little bit earlier, so I'm going to skip over this slide in the interest of time here. So when we're building these applications, the important thing that you can take away from this slide is notice that on the bottom it says OS. It doesn't say Windows. So you can run ASP.NET Core application on Linux now. You can run it in Docker, and that actually works. And you can build it on Windows and restore it on a Linux machine, and it will work, assuming you don't use anything that's very Windows specific. So if you're building a typical web application or something simple like we're building here, it most definitely will work. I don't know why that keeps dying. So when we build these applications, on the server side, ASP.NET applications are always console applications. So you start an actual exe that is a console application. And when you look at the source code of that component, of that application, you can actually look at the main function. So you get full control all the way down to where the entry point for that application is. Again, if you've built ASP.NET applications on the old classic stack, then you know that you couldn't do that because it was very closely coupled with IIS. And then when a request materialized, it just came into your pipeline through some magic, right? And then it ran through the pipeline, and then all these events fired, and eventually a request gets served. Well, now you get full transparency all the way down to the entry point in main. So if you don't want to use Kestrel and you want to use some other web server, it's actually really easy to plug in your own web server. Not that you necessarily want to do that, but there is other platforms that run with the ASP.NET Core engine. So Nancy, for example, has an ASP.NET Core version that you can use, which is an alternative to the Kestrel server. They have their own server that you can use. So the host is basically your starting point. And one of the things that happens in the host, it starts up the web environment, which also loads Kestrel. OK, so then that runtime environment has a choice. It can connect to either the full .NET framework, if you're running on Windows, or it can run to .NET Core. And so when you do this, you now use a technology called .NET Standard to talk to the backend, to the actual runtimes. And by using .NET Standard, you have one level of abstraction away that you can simply, by configuring the application differently, run against a different runtime. So .NET Standard is basically what used to be MS Corelib. But rather than being one big library, and .NET Standard really points at a whole bunch of small packages, NuGet packages, that actually make up that runtime. So it's much more modular than previously, where we only had that one big file that we had to pull in. And right now, that's not happening yet. But in the future, the compiler will be smart enough to figure out exactly which components out of that it needs and only ship that with the application. So you can get a much smaller runtime. You don't load all of that overhead into every application. OK, on top of that then sits the actual Kestrel web server that fires into the ASP.NET pipeline. And the Kestrel web server, as I said, it's really high performance. It's much, much faster than the IISs natively. And it's been hitting over 1 million requests a second in some of the benchmarks that the ASP.NET team is testing for. And that's pretty amazing, because it's almost 10 times faster than what we used to be able to do with a classic ASP application that's optimized. So performance can be really good. But, and you hear the ASP.NET team talk about this a lot, right? They talk about how great the performance is. Just keep in mind that those are for very low-level pieces of the framework that they're talking about. That's raw throughput. And typically, when you build your typical web applications that hit Entity Framework and SQL Server and who knows what else, you're not going to see a drastic change in your performance compared to the old application. What you will see, though, is lower resource usage. And that's important if you host on the cloud. It can keep potentially your resource users down. So then the next layer is the middleware, which is basically what used to be in classic ASP.NET HTTP modules and handlers. So it's a middleware pipeline that requests pass through before they get to some termination handler that handles an actual request. And the termination handlers are typically frameworks, full-based frameworks. So it's MVC, which now includes Web API and MVC all mashed together. So you can do both MVC endpoints and Web API endpoints in the same controller, for example. They all use the same filters. They use the same infrastructure that is involved with that. So no more writing Web API filters and then writing the same filter for MVC as well. So you can mix them both together. Now, when we're building these applications, these client-side applications, we're only going to be dealing with APIs, basically. OK? All right, so if you do build these applications and you end up using Visual Studio, one of the things you want to consider very carefully is, well, how do I structure my application? And I think this is very important. I prefer to keep my projects separate. So I put my Angular project into a separate project and then my backend project into another project. So when you actually are building your applications, that's what we've been doing here, right? I mean, we haven't built a backend yet, but when we do, it will actually be a completely separate project that runs that. And so that's the easiest way to make sure that you can update your .NET application and then also update your Angular application later. There is tools that can mash it all together. But you really don't want to do that, I think. It makes it really hard to manage the update process as you go to newer versions. So ultimately, though, you might want to run your application in such a way that the server can also serve the HTML. And in order to do that, you can use the Angular CLI to generate the final HTML output of the build process directly into the folder where ASP.NET expects it, which is www.root. Okay? So if we look at that picture, the top is the Angular project. The bottom is the ASP.NET Core project. And then the Angular CLI output gets generated into the www.root folder, where you have that big blob of bundles that were generated by that application. So the entire application, in this case, can now run using whatever mechanism when I click Start in Visual Studio, or I deploy this application to the server. OK, let's take a look and see what it looks like to create a .NET application. So again, I'm going to go into the console here. Bigger, right? Let me make that really big. So I'm going to go to Projects. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it To-Do Service. So this will be our service backend. I'm going to change into To-Do Service. I'm going to say .NET New To-Do Service, and I'm going to say Web API. Oops. The other way around. .NET New Web API To-Do Service. Come on. Why did that not work? Yeah, I mean, that's what I thought, but really? Let's look at the help. What is the... Why the hell? Oh, first, maybe, no. No, this should totally work. .NET new. Well, I mean, it should be Web API, so that's correct. And then the name of the project, to-do service. Oh, maybe, oh, no. I'm sorry, the name you don't specify. So you get confused between the Angular CLI. So the name of the folder determines what the name of the project is, right? So if we now do this, here we go. That's why you change the folder first instead of the Angular CLI where you do it on the folder below. So everybody has their own way of doing it, of course, right? So I'm going to start up code from here. So I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. I'm going to open a folder, and I'm going to use this folder. So we'll go here, select that folder, don't save. OK, so if we go inside of here, it's created a controller for us. There's a startup class. And so let's see here. It's, yes, there are unresolved dependencies, restore. So you want to make sure that when you start this up in Visual Studio Code for the first time that you say yes to all those properties, because it will set up the debugging for you. If you don't do that, it will not actually let you do it later on, and you have to manually type all of that in. And that seems to be changing a lot, so it's really hard to find good information on that in that particular piece. OK? All right, so this is the startup class, right? So, and the actual program file, if we look at that here, is that main function that I mentioned, right? It's main, and we get control all the way back to the very beginning. And you notice there we say use Kestrel and use IIS integration, which means the server can run both under Kestrel and it can also run under IIS. Then there's a startup class that's basically setting up the runtime environment for ASP.NET in this case. So we have a builder in there that sets up a configuration builder. And then from there, we have services that we add. So this is dependency injection, basically. You configure all the dependency injection features that you want. So in this case, it just is all wrapped up inside of this add MVC. So typically, when you have services that you can configure them in that particular method. So if you have certain things you want to dependency inject into other things, here's where you would declare those. OK, so then we basically say app.useMVC, and we should be able to run from there. So then if I'm over here, I should be able to say .NET restore and .NET run. OK, it's running. I'm going to bring up a new tab here. And we go localhost 5000. So that's the default port that it uses. And it's going to give me a 404 because we created an API and there's nothing there. Right? So the server is basically going, I don't know what to do with this. So there's a test value. There's a controller with test values. And so there's my ASP.NET application. OK? So now let me go and grab some code here. From my padnock to-do, from my to-do service. And I'm going to go into my controllers here. And I'm just going to copy a bunch of to-do items first. OK, so if we go back over into code here, and I go into my controller, I'm going to add these here at the bottom. And now, obviously, in a real application, you would put that into a separate file. I just like to keep it simple here for this example. So what I'm doing here is I basically create a to-do item class, which maps the to-do items that we have on the client. OK? And then I'm going to take all of this stuff out of here, out of this guy. And I'm also going to take this top-level route out. Okay. And we're going to rename this, and we're going to make this a to-do controller. Now that really doesn't matter, actually. But what we're going to do is we're going to say public static list of to-do item, and call it to-dos equals to-do item dot create list. So I created a function there that basically creates that list for me, right? So here's my create list, and all it does is return a list of these to-do items, these standard items. Okay? So then I can go ahead and create a method here on my controller that actually receives a request. So let's make that to-dos. And let's call it public list to-do item get to-dos. And return, what are we going to return? Right? That's it. All right? So if we go back down into our application here, we can shut this down and start it back up. Go, oops, didn't like something. Oops, we're missing a bracket here somewhere. Looks like the namespace is missing. It's so hard to do when you have like 2 lines of code you're looking at. And there we go, it's running, right? So if we go to our to-dos now, should be able to say to-dos. And there's our list of to-dos. Cool, right? All right, so that works. So now we can also do something a little bit different, just kind of as a, hey, look at what you can do. Let's run bash and jump into Linux. Okay, anybody use the Windows shell for bash? Yeah, so anywhere in Windows now, if you have the bash shell installed, you can just type bash, and immediately inside of the bash shell, running Linux inside of that same folder that I was just in. So now I can do .NET restore. So I installed the .NET SDK on this bash shell. So it's going to restore my packages. Actually, let me do one other thing here so we can actually see this work. Let's go into the startup code here. And at the configure here, let's go at the very end and say console.writeLine. And we're going to go system.runtime.interop services. Why does my IntelliSense not work? Runtime info, I believe, .os description. Okay, so that's going to tell me what version of we're actually running. Okay, so I'm going to do another .NET restore here, just to be sure. Okay, and then go .NET run. So it's a bit slower running under the bash shell because it's basically interpreting that. But notice what it says here. It says Linux, right? We're running under Linux. And I can go to my browser here and hit that same page and get the same result. So that's your same application now running under Linux. Okay, very simple, obviously, but it just works. Okay, the same thing is true if I build a Docker image for this, run it in Docker, it'll just work. Okay, so that's simple platform for it. Now, other platforms like Node.js have taken that for granted for a long time, to be fair, right? But for Microsoft and ASP.NET, or .NET in general, that's a pretty big thing. And I think we should be really kind of be thankful for Microsoft for pushing us this way, even though there is some pain involved in doing all of this, right? Because now we can actually build applications for other platforms. And you know, with Docker being the hot thing that it is, it looks like almost all development is going to move that way if it gets deployed onto a server. So be hard-pressed to find somebody to actually tell me what the story for Windows is in the future. Unless you're hosting in-house. OK, so we got that. So let me go back over here and pull in a few more methods. So let's pull in all the methods that we're actually using to simulate what we were doing on the client there. So let me pull in these. And let's pull those into our server here. Let's restore one more time. Let's shut these guys down. We're not going to do anything here. And we'll go into this controller. And I'm going to just paste these in here. So we have a method to do a delete. And basically, we just find the first one and then remove it. We'll find first or default and return it based on the title. So we can search for one and look it up. So if we go back to the command prompt now, let me jump out of Linux here. So we're back into PowerShell. And if I go .NET restore, so you have to restore every time you jump back and forth because it compiles for that particular platform. So I've restored, and notice how much faster it is here, right? Because we're running natively on Windows. Before we were running under Linux, but it's some weird interpretive service that actually does all that. But it is really complete. So you're actually able to run an ASP.NET application that tells you that there's a lot of stuff going on underneath the covers. So very complete. So in .NET run. OK, and again, we should see here. Oops. OK, I don't know why that didn't work. That's only during a demo will it do that, right? So you can see here now it says Microsoft Windows 10, right? So we're running under Windows now. And then if we reload again, then there's our list. Or I can say to do padlock presentation. Oops. Oh, I didn't save it. Bloody hell. OK, so then I have to rerun that again. Should be fast, though. So I didn't save it, so the value actually didn't come up. And now there's that individual guy. OK? So you can also see that even though I'm using the command line here, that the workflow to do this is pretty smooth, actually, right? I mean, all you have to do is flip back and forth. And in fact, what I usually like to do is I like to bring up the command window inside of my editor. So I can do that in VS Code. I just didn't do it here. OK? So any questions on this? So this is the basic server-side stuff.
So the setup that you had, like with .NET New, having Kestrel and just the startup class with middleware components, is that specific to just .NET Core or for the full framework as well?
Well, if you build a ASP.NET Core web application, you get the option of using the full runtime, but you just reference the runtime differently. So there's a configuration file that says which version of .NET you're targeting, and you change that to full framework, so it'll be .NET 4.5.1 or it'll be 4.6.1 probably that you're targeting. And when you do that, then it will use the full runtime instead of using all of those little libraries.
So when you run it under Linux, what is the IIS, use IIS integration? What does that mean?
Well, IIS won't be running if you're running on Linux. So if you're running Linux, you will be running probably Nginx or Ha proxy or something like that. So really, the piece that sits in front is just a proxy. It just forwards requests over, right? OK, so the last thing that I'm going to do here is, I guess, just show how we can integrate with this. And we're going to run out of time. I can see that already here. But let's do at least one of these. So let's add a new method here in the server side, on the client side, and call it load to-dos. OK, so when you do this, what we want to do here is use an HTTP component. So in order to use that HTTP component, I actually need to add it to my dependencies that get injected into my page. So the HTTP component is a top-level component, and I can say private HTTP, which is the name of the variable that I'm passing in, and also a property that gets created. And then I want to use the HTTP component as the type. So here, again, WebStorm helps me, and I can say I want to import this from Angular HTTP, and that will pull it in automatically at the top there. So then once I have that in place, I can say this.http.get, and then the URL that I want to use. So usually what I like to do when I do this is say base URL equals HTTP localhost 5000/API. Oops. OK. So why do I put it up here rather than in there? Well, in case I need to change it later, I can change it in one place, and then every request that uses it can change it in one place. So typically, in a real application, I would have this in a service and then actually pull that in globally for the entire application. But in this case, just pulling it here. Okay, so then we go base URL, this dot base URL, plus to-dos, and then we get back a observable. Now, observable is something that Angular uses called RxJS. Anybody familiar with reactive extensions? So reactive extensions are kind of popular in .NET, right? So there's also a version in JavaScript that exists, and observables are part of that mechanism. So all the events that Angular publishes are always observables. So you can kind of think of observables as promises on steroids. So promises are one-off events, so they can only fire once, whereas observables are basically events that can continue to fire and get served to you as a new event comes in, it gets served to the subscriber. So you can have a list, and typically it could be an array, or it could be a set of events that fire, and they fire into this list. Now for HTTP requests, this doesn't really look any different rather than saying then. On a promise, you're going to use subscribe because you're subscribing to the final event. So what that's going to give you, it's going to give you a response object that is basically the HTTP response that comes back. So what I can say here is I can say this dot to-dos equals response.json. Okay, and when I do this, it basically takes the JSON response that comes back from the server and turns it into a real object. So then the final thing I want to do is I want to actually call this here, so load to-dos. And I'm going to get rid of this list of to-do items here that we had initially. Okay? So let's just make that an empty list for now. So now when the page loads, it should call this, and it should run at this point. Okay, so let's see what happens. Yeah, nothing. Right? Oh, good, because it doesn't work. But hey, come on, but this time I knew it wasn't going to work. That's better, right? I think. So we do have an error, and access control origin. So remember I was talking about that? We're doing cross-domain calls because we're running on port 4200 and we're connecting to port 5000. So we need to add the course policy. So let me do that real quick on the server here. So what I need to do is I need to go search. I know these guys are pushing me here, so this is the last thing we're doing. So what we need to do is we need to go into the startup file here, and I'm going to just copy the policy here. Okay. So this is a configuration setting that you make, and I'm going to go into Visual Studio here. And if I go to the startup class here, as one of the services that we configure, we use services.addCourse, just like I'm doing here, and we're specifying a course policy by name, and then specify what we want to allow in this course request. Okay, so we allow any origin, any method, any header, and then allow credentials, which is what we want to do. And then the final thing we need to do then is we actually need to use that policy. So what we do is we say app.useCourse and the name of the policy, which is course policy. Okay, now what? What else do I have to do now? I have to stop and start, right? So rerun that, and hopefully and there we go. So that's a new list. Okay, so we've pulled some data down from the server. Yeah, we got one! Okay, so I think I'm out of time here. So there is a little bit more that actually goes after this. So the thing that I wanted to show was actually another application that you can check out online that has much more detail on actually doing more interesting things. So what happens here is we're just doing very simple data that we're just retrieving that basically comes from a static list. But normally what you would want to do, of course, is you want to connect to a database and actually layer an application properly, right? You don't want to have all your logic inside of a controller, but you actually want to have a business object or a repository that you're pulling data from. And so the other sample application that is pointed to by this, the link that's on the slides here at the very end. Let me bring that up. You can actually check out that application. It runs online, so you can play with it first online, and then you can actually go to the GitHub repo and download and take a closer look of how that application is layered. So the album viewer application is the one that I'm talking about there, and that one that is actually at that URL has a bunch of best practices built into it. It's still a very small application, so it's still manageable, but it's a little more complex, obviously, because it uses several projects that breaks out everything.
Will your slides be posted on GitHub?
Yes, so this is the slides will be here. So there is the the PowerPoint slides are there. OK, so I guess that's all I have for you then. And if you have any questions, we can either take them after they're done with their stuff, or I'll be over at the, what is it, Thirsty Lion?
Thirsty Lion.
Yeah, there we go.
Excellent. Thanks, Ray.
OK.